The woman who wrote this email wants to be anonymous. No problem, but here's what she writes. In 1994, my husband was employed by a drilling company based in Klamath Falls, Oregon. He traveled quite a bit around the country taking natural gas and water samples from various wells. He worked with a crew of 3 other men, and their schedule consisted of 23 days on the job, followed by 10 days off. The 4 would pocket their per diems, money that the company offered as an allowance for expenses, and sneak aboard the freight trains to and from drilling sites. Their favorite spot was near a California town called Portola. As the train would begin to slow crawl up the mountain, they would jump off by a ranger station. The crew would unpack their camping gear and proceed to enjoy the next 10 days of freedom, fishing and hunting, and enjoying the isolated beauty of the forest and its nearby waterfalls. It was a great place to be at one with nature before heading back to the rough and tumble reality of their drilling jobs. My husband and his crew were tough men, seasoned veterans of the outdoors. They didn't fear anything because they all shared a mutual respect and understanding of their surroundings. But on this particular day, however, something would happen that would shake the men to their core. My husband was the first one up at the campsite that morning. While the others barely stirred in their sleeping bags, he grabbed some clean clothes and shampoo and then made his way the 300 yards to the waterfall. It was perfect for bathing. The basin at the foot of the falling water measured 30 square feet and was enclosed by 25 feet of rock, like 4 sides of a wall. One of the crew members, a mountainous man who dwarfed the rest of them at 6'4", had already measured the depth of the pool by walking out to the middle of it until he was totally submerged. His bare feet sunk into the black sediment while his outstretched arms and fingertips extended just above the water's surface, so the pool had to be at least 9 feet deep. My husband slipped into the basin and had just lathered his hair with shampoo when he heard an enormous splash and he felt the water ripple around him. His eyes blinded by the soap, he assumed one of the crew had just joined him, and when suddenly he heard someone screaming his name in utter terror. He rinsed the soap from his eyes quickly and he spotted his mountainous crew member yelling from the bank and pointing. Well, my husband spun around and came face to face with something grotesque and horrific. It wasn't a human. The water came up to its hairy chest and its head resembled a cross between a gorilla and a caveman. It let out a roar and my husband saw the beast's enormous incisors. Before he could react, it raised its brawny arms over its head and brought them down into the water, and the resulting wave knocking my husband backward. Well, disoriented, my husband had swallowed a mouthful of water and fought to gain his breath. By now, his crew had joined their mountainous co-worker on the bank, throwing rocks at this enormous man-thing as it crawled from the pool. They watched it walk through a 16-foot steel cable clothesline they had erected outside the camp. The thing pulled at it in anger, snapping it like sewing thread and dragging the remains into the woods. The panicked crew made their way to the ranger station to report the incident. They estimated the creature had to be at least 10 feet tall with 4-foot arms. Its teeth were as long as kitchen knives. The ranger took statements from the 4 men. He questioned their lack of transportation, and my husband had to confess that they were illegal stowaways who had snuck aboard the train. Well, the ranger considered their story and explained to them that the government was well aware of a man-like species existing in the area. He further warned the men that these beings were under government protection, and should they dare return or share their experience with the public, the full weight of the government would be brought to bear against the men and their families. My husband and the others looked at each other. What they had just witnessed was scary, but taking on the American government was something else entirely. They took the highway back. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the Dixiecryptid podcast. I'm back. Been gone a couple of weeks. I've been sick. Hey, at the end of this podcast, I've got some announcements to make. For people who follow this channel, it's not a big deal. Just want to tell you a couple of things. And the last story in this podcast is going to be chapter 1 from a novel called Lover's Moon. It's written by Jack LaFountain. It's his next in this Ed Landry novel series. They're really good. They're good mystery novels with werewolves, and this one actually has a new creature in it, which I think you might find interesting. But I love Jack LaFountain's books, and so I was able to narrate that. It's only available on Audible, and if you'd like a free promo code, just send an email to dixiecryptid@gmail.com. Give me a day or two to respond, and if you don't hear from me at all, that just means that all the promo codes have been given out. But there'll be a link in the description that you can click, and it'll take you right to that Audible page, and you can buy the book. Got 3 really cool stories in chapter 1 of Lover's Moon in this podcast. Let's do this! All right, here we go. This writer doesn't give their name, and that's fine, but here's what she writes. My husband and I were house sitting for some friends while they took off for Florida. It was kind of a test run to see if they liked living down there before deciding if they would sell their home and make a permanent move to the Sunshine State. They left us one key, and it was given to my husband, who worked until midnight. The kids and I would usually be asleep by the time he got home. Late one afternoon, my mom wanted us to go with her to the department store. I left the door unlocked while we were gone, and by the time we got back, it was already dark. It was kind of a gingerbread neighborhood where you knew your neighbors. My mother helped me get the kids to bed. They were ages 4 and 1 at the time, so it took a little bit to get them settled. After she went home, I started to clean the house and remembered I had laundry downstairs. I went to the basement to gather up the clothes, but as I was removing them from the dryer, something caught my eye. Now, mind you, I've always felt creeped out in that grubby basement whenever I had to tend to the laundry. I would rush through it as quick as a whip before heading to the safety of the well-lit upstairs. I turned my head really slow, and I looked toward the wall, at the hole in the cement blocks. At one time, our friends thought that they would make a basement bigger, so they dug it into solid earth until they hit some really big boulders and they couldn't finish the job. I stared into the hole, and I saw a shadow, like something was hiding in there. I grabbed the laundry basket and hightailed it back up the stairs, stopping just long enough to latch the basement door behind me. That little eye and hook wasn't going to discourage anyone or anything from busting through, but it gave me a peace of mind. Well, I phoned my mom and I begged her to come back for us. And I called my husband at work and I demanded that he head straight home at that moment. I wasn't going to set a foot in the place until he gave it the once-over twice, but after a thorough search, he found nothing. He accused me of overreacting, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual going on inside this home. I had a friend of a friend who was a psychic, and she offered to go through the house. She took her time walking through each of the rooms, absorbing what she called the vibrations left behind by previous occupants. She suspected that a murder of some kind had taken place, suggesting that a victim possibly died in a fall after being pushed down the basement stairs. My husband, not a great believer in the paranormal or the psychics, scoffed at her conclusions, but I was ready then and there to leave the premises and move in with my mother. Our friends had gotten a great deal on a place. The original owners and their 2 children were a textbook case of dysfunction, mainly due to the husband's drinking and violent temper. Feeling trapped in a hopeless situation, the wife chose to leave behind the husband and her children, and she never came back. A few months later, the man was driving drunk and was killed in a single-car accident. And with the mother of the children unable to be located, the orphans went to live with their grandparents, and the house was sold to our friends. My husband was a carpenter, and we decided to help out with some badly needed upgrades. While we were digging out some rotting timbers around the foundation, our 4-year-old pulled a bone out from a dirt pile. Eventually, we unearthed a human skull and several more bones, and through DNA testing, the authorities determined that the remains were those of the wife, the coroner having confirmed her skull had been fractured, likely by a fall. The husband had apparently murdered his wife and buried her body, and then concocted a tale claiming that she had abandoned him and their children. It was a shadow that caught my eye that day among the cobwebs of a musty basement, a glimpse of something that, for whatever reason, filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. My psychic friend claims that spirits will reach out from beyond the grave to redress an injustice done to them while alive on earth. Think of that the next time your eyes play tricks on you. Or if that sound you hear might be something other than creaking pipes in the walls of an old house. You never know what might be lurking just below the floorboards. This is a story from Dave, an email I received from Dave, and it covers the whole spectrum of Bigfoot, paranormal, poltergeist, everything. And he's very brief, but this is an interesting story, and I think you'll find it interesting too. I didn't believe in orbs in the woods or the tie between Bigfoot and aliens. I even questioned my late twin brother's story, which occurred years ago at the base of the Strawberry Canyon Trail between US 50 and Highway 88. My interest in cryptids started with the Yeti. I read about them in Boy's Life magazine in the early 70s. Stories about Sierra Sounds and other cryptid types like the coneheads and the roundheads and the flat teeth, whether canines, both dog and wolf, nice or bad. It's all over the page, no pun intended. They've screeched at me, and I've chased these things through the forest, and I've been ambushed and surprised by them as well, and I don't care ever to be in their presence again. If you're into doing research, a man named H.E. Miller conducted an interesting study on 3 Texas female roundheads and 1 female conehead after a lightning strike during a Columbus Day storm, allegedly killing them near Redding, California. Some claim the event happened in Oregon. On one occasion, I was deer hunting with my good old Georgia buddy along Strawberry Canyon Trail. I was sitting on a large boulder when I heard a loud crack and then detected a faint fishy smell. Suddenly the stench hit me again, big time. I have never smelled anything that sickening as I spun around and this creature stepped toward me. A shot rang out and it scared it off. Thankfully, my buddy had been there to back me up. I had just chased one of these things a month earlier with a loaded shotgun, but my karma was against me that time. My Georgia hunting buddy wasn't there to cover me, but I still managed to escape. I hiked a lot of the Trinity Alps by myself at age 16. I was a Boy Scout and tapped out for Order of the Arrow. I never once experienced anything bad as a kid. Now, I should clarify that I'm not an expert, nor am I a Force Recon, Navy SEAL, forward air controller, or a timber cruiser, or a forest ranger. As of July 24 of this year, my twin brother Gordy has been gone for 16 years. His 4-wheel drive club had adopted Strawberry Canyon Trail, and after I started hunting there, we would ride together in his truck. They were closing the trail after deer season, and we were camped at its base on the US 50 side. Our 6 tents were in a semicircle. Gordy was situated on the end nearest the trees. Something kept pacing around his tent that night. It ran a stick underneath and pawed at the sides of his tent. This creepy nighttime visit went on from 2 a.m. until dawn. 2 guys from the group got up to relieve themselves and claimed later that something in the dark was growling at them. There was a couple in the camp with a dog who had been hit by a car as a pup and had injured his voice box, which made for the easiest explanation. I hope I did my brother's story justice. Rest in peace, Gordy. I miss you. Caltrans at Caples Lake was at the other end of the trail. There were others camping during this same time. They allegedly had a male Bigfoot walk within 20 yards of their campfire. They reported the encounter to the ranger station. Somewhere I have a newspaper clipping of the account. Apparently, it was investigated. The Sacramento Union ran a story, though, and I have not been able to find it in the archives since the paper went out of business some years ago. My brother claimed the Rangers had given the nickname Blood Alley to a small nearby canyon with a creek flowing through it, as a couple had been killed there. A child went missing from a playground at Camp Sacramento. It was documented by David Pilates in Missing 411. The Lover's Leap Trail is on the US 50 side, which runs from Sacramento to Tahoe. I remember an earlier paranormal encounter that I didn't understand at the time because I was so young, and my parents kept the details from us for our own protection. We were living in Rancho Cordova, California, which is near Sacramento. My folks always had trouble getting us to go to bed each night while living in that house. Once we finally caved, all us kids would run down the hallway to our rooms. We were all afraid, but we didn't know why, so our beds were safe havens from whatever we thought was lurking outside our bedrooms. Mom and Dad's clock radio would go off at odd times in the day and night. Mom claimed something invisible kept poking her in the back while she prayed. Other strange poltergeist-type nonsense was happening. My mother has always had a love-hate relationship with spirits since she was 18. She claimed the veil that separates the living from the dead is very thin, and she could see the spirits that existed around us. Her belief started to cause her problems. One night, because of the so-called juvenile poltergeist stuff that she was enduring, she made a really, really big mistake and commented out loud how stupid the spirits were. A very evil presence appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, and it lingered there. One evening while she was in bed, a demon suddenly rushed her without any warning. She drew the blanket over her head and cried out for my dad, who was in the bathroom. The way she later put it, I could have been murdered, and he was acting like my neurotic wife and taking his own sweet time, speaking about her husband. The officials in our church were summoned, who immediately sided with my terrified mother over my cynical father. They were saying that the world is in a constant battle between good and evil, that when certain events have happened or are about to take place, evil spirits appear to alter the outcome. Then he gave my dad a lesson in poltergeist removal. My mother sat with us kids in the car while my father ventured back inside the house, and when he came out, he was as white as a sheet. My dad had obviously experienced something, and whatever it was, I sensed that he had a newfound faith in my mother and her paranormal sensibilities. As for us kids, we remained clueless until much later in our lives. Mom insisted that the hallway was like a type of conduit filled with entities appearing at one end and fading away at the other. These ethereal beings were also miserable and self-absorbed, ignoring the world around them, or, as she described their behavior, weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. That's why we could feel their presence, while our mother was assured that in their narcissism, the poltergeists were already preoccupied and therefore unbothered by a bunch of kids still scared of the dark. Well, Mom never believed that we were ever in harm's way. The following is Chapter 1 of Lover's Moon, an Ed Landry novel written by Jack LaFountain. A link for the audio book will be in the description of this video. Chapter 1. A familiar voice above and behind mumbled strange words in a cadence reminiscent of prayer that had long been forsaken, that stirred the heart unlike those uttered in church. The fear gripping that heart was pushed aside by something new. Power. Strength exuded from within, sweeping away doubts and uncertainties that had burrowed deep into the soul. A fire burned, fanned higher with every heartbeat. Reborn. The word flashed across the feverish mind that gave birth to it. Yes, reborn. spoken aloud, set the words in stone. Darkness fell and swallowed the blackness, and floating on air, a distinct click was followed by a blast that shook the world. The pain of the explosion was beyond description as cells were ripped asunder and carried on the shock wave that brought the world crashing down in tiny bits like rain. Nothing existed, no light, no sound, no sensation, except a fading ember of consciousness awaiting its death. In the glowing kernel of self-awareness was the idea of motion, not the sensation of moving, just the idea that it might be possible. From the unseen, unknowable possibility of destination, a pinpoint of light dawned. A silvery, white fog grew to contain all the world, and with it came the feeling of solid ground and the sensation of feet walking over it. Shades of gray appeared and gathered in shapes foreign and familiar, and in the distance 3 figures sat at a table. One lifted something, held it to the yet vague suggestion of a head, and promptly vanished. The remaining figures came into focus as the distance between the approacher and the approach dwindled. In the next instant came recognition, not only of who the person who vanished from the table was, but who she was, and what she was. She smiled, and her lips felt strange. One set of eyes beholding her expressed kindness, a type of gentle, welcoming understanding. The look dissolved into wide-eyed amazement as she flew at him, carried him to the ground, and ripped a key from his pocket. Stars twinkled in the night sky when consciousness returned. The moon, fat and full, sat atop the trees outside a window. She looked around the room and wrinkled her nose at the unfamiliar setting and its rotten smell. Rising, she brushed the dust from her dress. Dual hungers burned within her, one in her heart and the other somewhere deeper, more elemental, that demanded satisfaction. Nothing in sight held a promise of satisfying either, and she let her mind pursue her need and was carried on the wind over a place she recognized. The desire to call it home had ceased to exist with her. Now it was just Locket, a place to satisfy her need and leave behind. She came to rest outside a house where no lights burned, and for the briefest of moments it had been hers. Perhaps it still was, though she was no longer the woman who walked there. The woman was dead. She was, well, if not alive, certainly not dead. She walked across the lawn to peer into the window. There was no one inside. She had seen that, but she also knew that without seeing it with her eyes. She knew a great many things. Things stored in memory and beyond human recall were as fresh as the night air. And the sound of tires on the street nearby caught her by surprise. She knew the face behind the wheel of the police car. Did he see me? It doesn't matter. I saw him, and that's enough to know. Falling to her knees and willing a new form, she raced along behind the car, keeping just out of sight in the yards and shadows that lined the way. When Cletus Kingman stepped from his patrol car, the wind blew his scent to her, and she knew the name of her need: hunger. She quickly formed a plan to satisfy it. A sign flashing the message, "Welcome, y'all come in," was all she needed. She drifted inside, and the walls and locked door were not a barrier to her, not anymore. She had Ed Landry to thank for that, and she intended to thank him in person soon. He seemed to have vanished, but she had all the time in the world and knew that he would be back sooner than later. She wasn't disappointed. Cletus was back on the steps in front of the sheriff's office minutes later. It was easy enough to get his attention. He was quickly on his way to her, and she left a light on for him just in case he had trouble finding her. It was a good thing she did. His imagination when it came to hiding places was limited, and not once did he look up to see her on the ceiling, so she made sure he heard her drop to the floor. Of course, by then it was too late. "Christy?" His last word was spiced with a mixture of astonishment and fear. She closed her teeth around his throat. He kicked a little, and there was a spray of blood as she pierced his carotid artery, but a single hand was enough to hold him still while she fed. The taste was the tang of metallic salt, warm and satisfying as she drank. She found the old description of vampires as bloodsuckers misleading, and until his heart stopped, she had to draw the blood from him. A loud howl from outside as she finished with him told her that she should be going. She slipped his gun back into its holster and locked the door before fading away into the twilight. Though she was little more than a vapor and the sun had yet to peak above the horizon, the light climbing into the sky seared her. She reached her new residence riding a light breeze. Blistered and scorched, she curled up to sleep upon the dirt beneath the house where she awakened not long ago. There was still one desire to satisfy, but for now that could wait. Anticipation would only make the taste of it sweeter, for it was a thrill greater than blood. It was the answer to the lust that burned unrequited in what was left of her humanity. "Landry," she whispered. Okay, guys, thanks for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you. Just a couple of things I wanted to say to people who normally follow this podcast. I've been getting some emails from folks wanting to know if we are going to the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference this July in Gatlinburg. We are not. It's too expensive. I've done it for 2 years in a row, and it costs me so much money to do that. And with this economy getting worse and worse and worse, I'm just going to skip it this year, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe in a couple of years, the economy will bounce back and I'll have some extra cash and we can do that, but I can't do it now. So I will not be at Gatlinburg. I am going to be at another conference, or at least I'm tentatively planning to be at another, I guess it's a conference. It's in Alabama. It's in early June. I'm not going to have a booth, but I'm just going to go and kind of hang out with some people I've met through the years. And maybe somebody will be nice enough and let me sit at their booth and talk to people and get to know some people. I'd love to meet you all. But I'll announce more of that when I have more information on it. But I think it's in Anniston, Alabama, and I think the date is June the 10th. That's all I really wanted to say. Just a couple of things that have been on my mind that I don't really take time to talk about in the podcast anymore. I guess that's it. I can't think of anything else to say. I'm out of words. Sorry I've been gone for a couple of weeks. I've been sick. I still cannot shake this chest cold. I'm about to lose my voice after recording this podcast, but I'm going to keep plugging away, so I'll have another podcast up pretty soon. All right, I appreciate you guys. I love you, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.